Previously on the tabletop battlefield, we saw articles from Board Game Wire like this one, talking about CMON Limited, more commonly known as Cool Mini or Not. 2 weeks after revealing its 2024 losses could exceed $2 million, CMON delays publishing annual results, citing understaffed finance department. Well, they got around to publishing their annual results last Wednesday, and things are worse than expected. Their loss for 2024 was just over $3 million US, so a fair bit more than even the upper end of the warnings they were talking about back at the end of March. So to really understand what's going on with this company, you got to learn a little bit about accounting and Kickstarter/crowdfunding. Now, of course, disclaimer time right here. I am not a financial advisor, and this is not financial advice. We're just having more fun talking about CMON's annual financial statements because they are a publicly traded company. Also, I want to make one more disclaimer like I made last time. I want to be clear, I am not accusing CMON of any crime or any financial mismanagement or anything like that. I'm pretty sure everything they're doing with their financial statements is legal. I just want to explain a little bit because it may seem a bit strange if you're not used to this kind of way of doing math or keeping track of finances. To get started though, I have to define a stupid, simple business terminology, which is a business transaction. Let's say you wanted to purchase this miniature from me, which is the PB3X Pit Bull from my Fractured Colony Miniatures line. We'd negotiate some sort of price, you would give me the money, and then I would give you the miniature. And at that point, the transaction would be complete, and I would record the revenue from that on my financial statements, and it would factor into that year's revenue. However, when it comes to crowdfunding and pre-orders, there's something else we got to talk about, and that is unearned revenue. So this is from Investopedia.com. Unearned revenue is money received by an individual or company for a service or product that is yet to be provided or delivered. It can be thought of as prepayment for goods or services that a person or company is expected to supply to the purchaser at a later date. Let's say, for example, you wanted to go ahead and back a crowdfunding project of mine like you can do in a few months for the next set of Fractured Colony gaming miniatures in this little SAM site right here. When that money comes into me, but before I've gone ahead and sent out the STL files for the project, that money is technically considered unearned revenue. And it would not be recorded on my financials as revenue, but it would be recorded as a liability. And if you look here at the bottom of page 7 of CMON's financial statement, they talk about this. Upon the successful funding of these pre-orders, the group recognizes the total pledged amount less administrative fees as contract liabilities under IFRS 15. We'll talk about this next part in a moment. If we head back to page 4 of the report, we can see here the contract liabilities for 2024 was a little bit under $5.4 million. Considering they had about $9 million or so in money that was raised via Kickstarter in 2024, I guess that's like $3.5 million or so in administrative fees, but whatever, that's not really the point of this video. The next terminology is the one point I cut out there, which is recognized revenue. When a company takes in the money, it's unearned revenue, and at some point, something happens that causes it to now be recognized revenue, and they can write that revenue down on their financial report as actual revenue. Let's jump back to page 7 of the report to learn more about how Cool Mini or Not handles that. So here's the line that I stopped reading earlier. Revenue is recognized, there's that key phrase, at a point in time when the control of the products has been transferred to the customers. And also on the topic of wholesaling, a little bit further up in the document, we see this. Revenue from sales of products is recognized, there's that word again, at a point in time when control of the products has been transferred, being when the products are delivered to the wholesaler has full discretion over the channel and price to sell the products, and there is no unfulfilled obligation that could affect the wholesaler's acceptance of the products. So essentially, for the most part, once the products, whatever they are, leave the control of Cool Mini or Not, whether that's to a wholesaler or to the actual customers, that is when the revenue is recognized for that particular product. The last point on this topic is that unearned revenue can be used right away at the moment you receive it. Looking back at Investopedia.com, receiving money before a service is fulfilled can be beneficial. The early receipt of cash flow can be used for any number of activities, such as paying interest on a debt and purchasing more inventory. There are two important takeaways here. The first is that with unearned revenue, the actual money coming into a business coffers in any given year is fairly heavily decoupled, or at least it can be decoupled from what appears on their financial report, especially if crowdfunding projects are taking a really long time. And second, on the topic of crowdfunding projects taking a really long time, especially the shipping process is getting dragged out, it may be these delays in shipping are intentional in order to push certain recognizings of revenue, or certain times where they recognize revenue, into different periods to improve the look of a company's financial statements. Now, I want to be clear, I have no evidence that CMON is doing this. This is just a hypothetical thing that some companies may try to look into. What is the long-term outlook for CMON in this case? Well, oddly enough, for 2025, on a hypothetical annual report, things might actually look kind of good. Even though the company is not running any more crowdfunding projects for the near future, there's still a lot of unfinished ones sitting out there. If we take a look at their own crowdfunding project tracker, all these projects which are not shipped yet are potential unearned revenue that can still be recognized in 2025, and therefore the revenue for 2025 could be pretty good. Also, as we saw a few weeks ago, CMON laid off some chunk of its development staff, so therefore they're slashing their cost of operation, and then because of the fact they still have recognized revenue coming in and costs are going down, it is possible that at least on paper, they may make a decent profit. Of course, the big question in everyone's mind is, can these games right here actually be shipped, and is the company in serious financial trouble? We can look at a few numbers from the 2024 financial statement to get at least some idea as to what's going on, but it's kind of impossible to know for sure. So right now, at the end of 2024, CMON had about $2 million of cash on hand, and they had about $17 million in property, plant, and equipment that I suppose if things got really bad, hypothetically, maybe they could sell some of that to get some more cash. CMON did launch one crowdfunding project this year. At the time of this recording, it's at around $3.5 million. So we're looking at a total of $6 million or so, but there are some administrative fees that are not factored in, so that number of available cash is going to be a little bit less than that. Finally, they're still selling their games on the wholesale market to distributors and game stores and through their online store and things like that. So there is still going to be some other revenue coming into CMON, but the reality is I don't know exactly how much that's really going to be. I suspect that a sizable chunk of their revenue is not only tied to Kickstarter, but it's also tied to pre-orders from game stores for Kickstarter related or crowdfunding related items. And I know you're thinking, well, if you look at the actual financial report, they have a crowdfunding or Kickstarter section, and there's wholesale as a separate thing. But the thing is that crowdfunding part is obviously crowdfunding, but I think by looking at some of the words in the actual financial report, that some of that wholesale stuff too is not straight up game stores buying their product and having it shipped to them. It is some pre-ordering and possibly some sort of crowdfunding related wholesale actions going on. And once again, this is page 7 from the report talking about sales of products. Wholesale. Revenue from sales of products is recognized at a point in time when the control of the products has been transferred, being when the products are delivered to a wholesaler, ... So therefore, that terminology alone with recognized revenue means there is some sort of pre-ordering or unearned revenue involved. And then therefore, when we look at their total wholesale amount they make each year, this number right here of $16.8 million is not simply game stores ordering their product from distributors and distributors then ordering more product from CMON. If I had to take a guess, maybe at most they're going to get $10 million from the wholesale market in 2025, but that's just me kind of making an estimated guess. I honestly don't know exactly what that number would be. But then again, we're left somewhere in the $15 million total revenue plus cash for 2025 right now. is that enough to complete some projects and keep the lights on at the company? Maybe. Let's take a look at a few more numbers from the 2024 report. So on page 2 of the report, we see that between these two expenses right here, which is general administrative expenses and selling and distribution expenses, they're at about what? A little under $21 million US. Then they have some income taxes to pay and they have finance costs because CMON does have a small amount of debt. And making matters a little worse for 2025 is that some of that debt is coming due this year. At the end of 2024, talking about the borrowings are repayable as follows. On demand or within 1 year, they had almost $3 million in debt that's going to be paid back this year. So let's see, 21 million, 22, 23, you're looking at $25, $26 million to run the company this year. Hopefully for their sake that they're going to be bringing in more revenue from somewhere else, or they fired enough people that their administrative costs have gone down enough. Those numbers don't look great in my opinion. Maybe they've got some other tricks to pull out. I'm not entirely sure. Another option they have is maybe they will become a IP holding company where essentially they stop production of games and they mostly license their products out to other game companies to actually manufacture the games and take on a lot of the risk of selling and marketing those games. Hasbro's taken on this strategy with some of their other properties when it comes to Renegade Game Studios. They license to them Hero Escape, G.I. Joe, My Little Pony, Transformers, things like that. And they're like, let Renegade handle that game stuff that we think is a little too risky for our core business strategies. Though when it comes to CMON, of course, they've got Zombicide. That's probably their biggest, most famous name. They have a lot of licensed properties, which isn't great if you're an IP holding company. They do have some other things. There's Cthulhu Death May Die is another one of their big games, except that does a public domain property count as your own intellectual property? Not really. Unless you really want to have the Death May Die brand attached to it. I suppose if CMON went down this route, they would primarily be a Zombicide licensing company, unless you had smaller board game companies that wanted to go ahead and reproduce any of the number of like 100 plus independent standalone board games that CMON makes. Maybe one final exit strategy CMON is looking is they want to be purchased by some other company by slimming down, by getting rid of employees and trying to get rid of debt and fulfill some of these products. They're going to make themselves look very appealing for a larger company to come in and purchase them. Primarily, they're going to be getting the Zombicide license. Because when it comes back to all these crowdfunding projects that CMON currently has open, and the unfortunate truth when it comes to crowdfunding projects is, well, there's not any real obligation on the company to actually deliver on any of these. It's simply if they don't deliver on them, their fans will get ticked off and they won't really spend any more money with them. Probably not anyway. So let's say if a company wanted to come in and buy CMON when there's a whole bunch of projects still open, unless CMON brought along the cash and assets to get these projects finished, that means there's going to be a lot more money that needs to be spent by the purchasing company unless they wanted to abandon some of these projects, which in turn then would just burn goodwill with the gaming fan base, and that may negatively impact, well, it probably would really negatively impact their company if they bought CMON and threw away a lot of these projects. So I think if CMON wanted to make themselves more appealing for someone to purchase, they definitely want to get as many of these projects finished up as soon as possible. And finally, why don't we actually go ahead and look at the financial report to see what CMON says about their future? We could speculate all day about what CMON is trying to do or what might happen to them, or we could go to page 16 and read what they have to say about their future. Long-term strategies and outlook. In light of the current uncertainty brought about by the trade war, this is a reference to the whole tariff situation between the United States and China and escalating costs in China because of that, Our current strategy is to 1. Reduce development costs by focusing only on the development and fulfillment of games already launched, i.e. their crowdfunding projects. 2. Grow the European wholesale market. This would allow them to get around the US-China tariff debacle. And 3. Initiate production of small games in Europe to reduce the logistics cost of fulfillment. We strive to become a leading developer and publisher of quality tabletop games and are optimistic about the growth and development of the tabletop games industry despite the challenging business conditions currently. That number 3 point's kind of interesting. Initiate production of small games in Europe to reduce the logistics cost of fulfillment. Considering that CMON got rid of a lot of their current development staff, maybe they're not going to go back to building these large miniature games like Zombicide and such. So it's entirely possible that if CMON makes it through all this mess, what comes out on the other side is going to be a CMON that looks very different from the one that we've seen over the past decade. Well, that is about all I have for you guys today. I'll certainly follow this story and let you know if things get better or worse for CMON. There will be a middle of the year report sometime later on after June. It kind of varies when exactly that gets released, but I'll keep an eye out for it and probably do a video on it then. Anyway, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. Thank you guys all for watching. If you want to check out my Fractured Colony line of 3D printable gaming miniatures, that is over at fracturedcolony.com. And the next Kickstarter for that is going to be launching here in the next few months. I'll get a preview page set up sometime soon, and you can be able to follow there when things get launched. All right, I'll see you guys all next time.